So today we're going to talk about perfectionism and procrastination and how those two are connected. And I think it's important for us who are taking care of loved ones to know that perfectionism is impossible. It's an unattainable goal, and we can give ourselves a little bit of grace, I think, when we take care of our loved ones and maybe not stress ourselves out so much about the doing it perfectly, right? So hopefully by the end of this today, you'll have permission that you need to cut yourself some slack, give yourself some grace, and understanding the connection between perfectionism and procrastination is a great way to start kind of unraveling some of our behaviors and some of our thoughts. And I think it's good to know our loved ones that we're taking care of, but I think it's also really good to know ourselves and the patterns that maybe we are participating in, maybe unconsciously. And the better that we can know ourselves and the way we operate, the better we can then apply our skill set to caregiving. So my agenda for today is to define what is procrastination and what is perfectionism. So we're going to define our terms. We're going to go over some traits of a perfectionist and some of the reasons why we procrastinate. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the connection and how we get unstuck from this loop. And then I'll follow it up with some key takeaways. So during this training, if you have any questions or if you need any clarification, please feel free to add that into the chat or even unmute and just start speaking. It's not a whole lot of information today, so we do have time for conversation. Afterwards, I'll stop the recording and we can have a conversation. But of course, feel free to participate while I present this information to you. So I love this quote by Brene Brown. If you don't know who Brene Brown is, she's kind of the social worker. But she says that perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels this primary thought. If I look perfect and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. Okay, so a lot of times when we think about, well, I'm a perfectionist, you can say that kind of in a lighthearted way, like you like things just so, you're really good at what you do, you're very confident in what you do. But the reality is perfectionism is very self-destructive because it can get you to a point where you are just heaping shame and doubt on yourself if the result isn't what you had expected it to be, you aren't meeting your own expectations. And we'll get into that a little bit here in the next couple of slides. So we're going to define these terms, okay? So perfectionism stems from a fear of failure and judgment, okay? So perfectionism isn't necessarily wanting things just so, it is an avoidance behavior, right? So you're trying to avoid the feelings of failure, you're trying to avoid being judged, and so that's where perfectionism comes into play. So false belief systems make us feel like we aren't good enough, and we also often feel that others will judge us as not good enough, okay? So perfectionists will often struggle with receiving criticisms, and they can interpret negative feedback as a sign of their incompetence. Okay, so there's not really constructive criticism in the mind of a perfectionist. Okay, all criticism is condemning in their mind. Okay, and that's kind of like the black and white thinking, that perspective where it says anything less than perfection is automatically a failure. Okay, and if you have experienced this in your life, you know how exhausting this can be, right? Because you're constantly on that treadmill in your mind. Is it good enough? Is it good enough? Is it good enough, right? Could I have done more? Could I have done more? Could I have done more? And you know as well as I do as a caregiver, you don't always have time to do the more, right? You don't always have time to do things perfectly. And so if you're constantly condemning yourself for not achieving your standard of perfection, you're spending a lot of mental energy just kind of, spinning your wheels, so to speak. So the pressure to meet high standards can lead to stress and overwhelm, as well as performance and anticipatory anxiety, right? So maybe you start to feel all this kind of ambient anxiety about if I'm doing things well enough, am I performing well enough, okay? And so the fear of not living up to your own expectations can hinder your ability to start tasks and complete them, okay? So we're going to find out how that ties back into procrastination. So even when you do achieve your goal as a perfectionist, the sense of accomplishment is typically short-lived because a perfectionist constantly feel like they need to do more, and their self-worth is tied to achievements, and that makes it very unstable. Because also you can have an idea of what perfection is, and then you hit bumps in the road where whether your loved one maybe is not following the script, so to speak, and you have to course correct, redirect, and think on your feet, be creative. And that's very difficult if you're in this rigid perfectionist mentality, okay? So ultimately, striving for perfection is going to set you up for failure because perfection is not attainable. So procrastination stems from a variety of factors, including indecisiveness, lack of focus, lack of self-confidence, and task anxiety. So many procrastinators experience shame about their behavior, and that only serves to perpetuate the procrastination, right? Because they're going to avoid that shame by putting off whatever it is that they are anxious about or anxious about not performing well. So avoid facing discomfort. You're going to continue to procrastinate, and that leads to further feelings of shame and discomfort. So procrastination can be seen as a flight response, right? It's an avoidance behavior to avoid a perceived threat, such as a challenging or unattainable task, okay? So procrastinators might avoid making decisions. They may give up prematurely or delay starting a task due to their discomfort about it, okay? So I'm hoping that you can kind of start to see how these kind of mirror each other a little bit, that perfectionism and procrastination, because they're both avoidance behaviors, okay? So what are the traits of a perfectionist? Okay, so you may recognize yourself in some of these. You may recognize yourself in all of these, and maybe this doesn't apply to you at all, okay? But these are just some general traits of perfectionism. Setting unattainable goals, right? So perfectionists can set extremely high standards, and that will hinder their success. So instead, maybe consider starting with smaller goals and working your way up, right? Building your confidence by doing something that's easier or more easily attained, okay? They're often very outcome focused. So that means they're going to stress about the end result and not enjoy the process, okay? And I think we all, whether we're perfectionists or not, can identify with that at least at some point in our life, right? But it is important to aim high while also finding fulfillment in the journey, okay? Critical judgment. So perfectionists tend to be overly self-critical and judgmental of themselves as well as other people. So try to acknowledge achievements even if they don't meet your ideal standards. That's a way to kind of combat that. Disappointment. Perfectionists will often feel let down, leading to negative emotions. And I think that also kind of stems from those high standards that they have for themselves. And sometimes that kind of bleeds out into their standards and expectations for other people. So even if they feel like they're meeting their perfectionist standards, other people in their environment maybe are not. And that can lead them to feel disappointed, right? Kind of that if you want it done right, you do it yourself mentality. Of course, we all know that you can't do everything by yourself all the time. So you do have to enlist the help of others. And so being disappointed in the way other people perform or being disappointed in the way that you perform as a perfectionist, that's just going to lead to more stress for you. And then finally, procrastination. So again, it's that fear of failure. It's going to cause a perfectionist to become stuck and they're not going to be able to move forward. So the goal is to embrace wins and losses as part of life, right? And that taking risks, that is essential for growth, okay? The way that we learn is we mess up, right? And that's just kind of par for the course as a human being. So if any of these traits feel familiar, don't assume that your standards are all wrong, right? That's that black and white thinking. Consider broadening your focus and to be more success oriented and appreciate the journey and the shades of gray in between absolute perfection and absolute failure, okay? So when taking care of a loved one, it is vital to strive for your best, right? Obviously, but you don't have to aim for perfection. That's going to lead you to anxiety and depression and low self-esteem and all sorts of not so fun stuff, right? And that can not only affect you, but it can also affect the loved one that you're taking care of, right? If you're feeling like you're always not performing well, or if you are always getting disappointed or always stressed out and depressed or anxious because your standards are not being met, they're going to feel that, right? Whether that's just, even if you keep it to yourself, they can still kind of sense that energy. So just be mindful of that. So it is important to remember that perfectionism can hinder your productivity. So rather than seeing things as either a complete success or a complete failure, consider the gray areas, okay? A lot of happiness can be found in the gray, okay? So maybe your mom didn't do all of her prescribed exercises, but that's not a failure, right? That's a good enough day. And I know perfectionists struggle with good enough, okay? So practice saying that in your mind and practice accepting that idea if you struggle with perfectionism. Maybe your dad snuck a shake of salt on his low sodium diet. That's not perfect, but it's not a failure either, okay? Shades of gray are our friends. That's how we are sustainable caregivers, okay? So why do we procrastinate so much? Okay, so let's take a look at the 3 most common reasons behind this issue. So a fear of failure is most likely, or is the most common cause of procrastination. Again, your fear, the consequences of failing. So logically you think, well, if I don't attempt to take any action, then I'm not guaranteed to fail, right? I can't mess something up if I don't ever try it, okay? So to combat this fear, try using positive self-talk and reframing your thoughts in order to build confidence and courage, okay? So this can help you realize that failure isn't always bad, and it can actually present you with an opportunity for growth and improvement, okay? Again, failure is not a bad thing. Failure is part of life, but failure is necessary for growth, okay? If we did everything perfectly, we just hopped out of the womb, Einstein's and, whatever, then that would just kind of take a big chunk out of the whole experience of being a human being, right? We're not robots. We're not programmed for perfection. We need to find that peace in that gray area. Excessive perfectionism, right? So another reason that you might find yourself procrastinating is that excessive perfectionism thinking. You might find it difficult to take action unless you know that you're going to be able to do that job absolutely perfectly or up to your satisfaction level, okay? So that can be especially true if you're not familiar with the task that you're doing. Maybe it's something new, maybe it's something different than what you're doing, okay? Like if your loved one's care needs intensify, that can bring a lot of fear of failure, right? Maybe you never had to give injections before. Maybe you never had to do feedings through a tube before. Maybe you never had to do bathing before, right? And now you do. And so, of course, that unknown can be very frightening, and that can lead to that perfectionism, procrastination loop, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Experiencing low energy levels, right? Hey, that's just, we all experience that, right? It's just go, go, go all the time sometimes. So that's obviously another issue that you can face as a caregiver due to busy schedules. And that can lead you feeling tired all the time without any energy left for important tasks at hand, right? And that can lead you further into that procrastination mode, right? I'll get it tomorrow, I'll get it tomorrow, I'll get it tomorrow. Well, tomorrow comes and goes, and here you are still without getting that task completed. So to beat this one, make sure that during the day, you're taking proper care of yourself, right? Are you taking regular breaks throughout the day? Are you eating nutrient-rich foods, right? Sometimes we can have a full belly, but it's not really full of anything that's going to give us any fuel, okay? Kind of like putting cotton balls in your gas tank in your car, right? Yeah, your tank's full, but it's not full of anything that's going to make it go, okay? So make sure you're just mindful of what kind of food you're putting in to fuel your body, okay? Maybe you're not setting realistic expectations for yourself throughout each task, right? So you don't want to overwhelm yourself from trying too hard and taking on too much at once, okay? Get enough sleep every night. Obviously, easier said than done. If you have a loved one who's up at night or wandering, or maybe you're stressed out about bills or stressed out about your loved one's health, or maybe you're stressed out about your own health, that can make sleeping very, very difficult. But as you practice good sleep hygiene, it becomes an easier pattern to fall into and stay into, okay? So again, excuse me, make sure you're getting good sleep at night so that your energy levels remain high enough for productive work and not feeling too exhausted afterwards. And make sure you are taking those breaks, right? And of course, if you're taking care of someone else, it's going to be really challenging to manage all your duties and avoid procrastinating. But practicing, again, self-talk, positive self-talk, breaking your tasks into smaller steps, and making time for relaxation can help you kind of overcome some of these procrastinating habits. So again, it's just really about being intentional about prioritizing your own health as well as your loved one, okay? So what is the connection? Now that we know perfectionism and procrastination, we did kind of touch on it, but I'm really going to zero in here on what the connection is. So Procrastination is often linked to perfectionism. However, not all perfectionists are procrastinators, and not all procrastinators are perfectionists, right? For many individuals, perfectionism and procrastination are intertwined, though. And so that's going to create what's called the perfectionism procrastination infinite loop. Okay, so what does that look like? So you have perfectionistic standards, right? You fear failure with those standards. There's great discomfort regarding that unsuccessful outcome. That discomfort causes fear. And then imperfection and discomfort are avoided by procrastinating. Okay. So it's just kind of like, I know I can't get it done perfectly. I know if it's not perfect, it's a failure. And so I'm just going to put it off. I'm going to avoid that failure. Okay. So perfectionists experience significant anxiety when they fear they might not achieve their goals perfectly, right, to their standards. And procrastination provides a temporary escape from that anxiety, right? So that's going to allow you to avoid feelings of failure for a time, right? It's not permanent. So the act of procrastinating often leads to feeling shame, right? Man, why didn't I just get those dishes done? Why didn't I just run to the bank, right? Or whatever it is. And that's going to reinforce that perfectionist mindset, right? So the cycle continues as we avoid tasks due to our fear of imperfection. And that's going to result in ongoing anxiety and shame for both perfectionists and procrastinators. Okay. So how do we get unstuck? Okay, so these are some simple, tried and true tips. Even if you're not necessarily a perfectionist, you're not necessarily a procrastinator, I think this is just some good direction on how we can make caregiving daily more manageable. So of course, there's always going to be jobs to get done. Maybe you got to clean out that cluttered closet, or you need to file taxes, you need to get your car's oil changed. Mine's been needing to change for a long time, and I keep putting that off, so I get it. But instead of approaching these things head on, we can putter around the house and get busy with small tasks that aren't really going to do anything. They're not really important or urgent, but we're just distracting ourselves. We're like, oh, I'm busy. I'm still getting stuff done, but you're still avoiding some of these things that need to be prioritized. So when we procrastinate for too long and for too much, the big stuff just isn't going to get done, right? And if it does get done, it's usually completed in a very haphazard manner, right? We're just we run out of time. Now we have to get it done before the deadline. And so here's the best at the last minute, right? And that's going to start that vicious cycle. So you wait until the last minute and then you're stressed because you're short on time. And then you feel guilty and angry at yourself for being in that position. And you feel twice as overwhelmed with all the responsibilities. And so that scenario is the perfect breeding ground for caregiver burnout, right? Because you're just adding stress, the unnecessary stress over and over and over again. So what can you do to stop procrastinating? So you'll need to break old habits and develop new ones, okay? So not only will you get more of the important tasks done, but you'll also reduce your stress levels and ultimately free up more time for yourself to enjoy just being and not doing, okay? So number one, create a to-do list. Now this is important. A lot of times we have a constant to-do list running in our brains, right? The tabs are always open. But the tip here is to write it down. Okay, actually physically write out a to-do list. That can help you focus on each task and its significance, okay? I will often advocate for journaling, and I tell you I never do it. And I will double advocate for list writing, and I do that, okay? It does make a difference, okay? So make sure you write your lists out. Next, prioritize what's on that list, right? So identify what needs immediate attention and what can wait. Okay, sometimes we have these big looming tasks in our mind, but they're 4 or 5 months off, but we're stressing out about them now. Okay, so we can have these priorities written down for us for easy access, and that can kind of help eliminate some of that anxiety. Okay, and it also helps you to estimate the time required for each project, and you can plan your time accordingly, right? So you're not constantly rushed. And if you're like me, feeling rushed is like the surefire way to get you all kinds of anxiety and all kinds of stress, right? So giving yourself ample time to do what you need to do is a great way to reduce some of that stress. Next, break it down. So divide large tasks into smaller, manageable tasks. That approach is particularly helpful for caregivers dealing with lengthy tasks, right? And you know what that is in your own life, what a lengthy task would be. So make sure you just break it down. For me, it's any type of organization is going to take me a gajillion years. you have to make a mess to clean a mess in those spaces. So I have to know, okay, if I need to organize my laundry room, I'm going to have to give myself a whole weekend to do it. Okay. Not expect that I can get it done in 4 hours on a Saturday. It's going to take me Saturday and Sunday to get it done. And I know that about myself. And so you just got to think about that. What are your habits? What are your routines? How do you do things? And then just give yourself the time to get that done. So next, set short-term deadlines. So establishing small-scale deadlines can ensure consistent progress, okay? So maybe I know it's gonna take me a whole weekend to get my laundry room organized, but I know on Saturday I can get A, B, and C done, right? And then that way, once A, B, and C are done, even though there's still D, E, and F to take care of, I can sit down and relax and say, I did enough for today, okay? And that's just an example that for my own life. Next, visualize success. It's amazing how much our minds change the way we perceive the world, okay? So if you keep a clear mental picture of the completed task and how you feel, that can actually boost your motivation to get it done, okay? And focusing on that end result is going to be great for your motivation. Next, as well as you can, remove distractions. Okay, so for me, it's definitely my phone. So my phone stays on silent because if it bings at me, I'm going to pick it up. Okay, but you know what is going to be a distraction for you. So just eliminate anything that's going to hinder your focus. And maybe if you need to take some respite or provide some respite for your loved one while you take care of these tasks, right? Maybe you just hire somebody to come in, for a couple hours one day so that you can do some of the bills or whatever it is that you need to do. And if you're not on our respite reimbursement program, I encourage you to apply, and that can help cover the costs of some of that respite service, okay? Next, change your expectations. This is a big one, and I think it can be very difficult, especially if you have perfectionist tendencies, because you don't want to change your expectations, right? Why shouldn't I do things perfectly? Well, I think we sometimes blur the lines between our best and perfectionism, okay? Because our best and perfect. Perfect just does not exist, okay? So you can do your best and it not be perfect, but it can still work perfectly in your space, okay? So striving for that perfection is going to hinder your progress. So just strive to do your best and accept it as your best, and that's good enough, okay? Next, just do it. Sounds easy, right? But if we just got to set our minds to not procrastinate. Okay, so getting started is often the hardest part, but that feeling of accomplishment at the end is definitely worth it. Okay, I don't know about you, but there have been many times, probably countless times in my life, where I have a task kind of running in my head. I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this, and I will put it off for days. And then when I finally sit down to do it, it's literally like a 20-minute task. And I'm like, why did I stress about a 20-minute task for 4 days? That doesn't make any sense. But it happens, right? And we sometimes don't even realize we're doing it. And then next, cross it off, right? You made that list, cross it off. Physically crossing off a completed task provides a sense of satisfaction and progress. Okay, so those are just some simple tips. And I often use this with my children who struggle with executive dysfunction due to ADHD. And it's a lot easier to feel competent to complete your tasks when they don't seem so big in your mind and they're just out on paper. And then, of course, breaking them into small sections makes it a lot easier too. So studies have shown that perfectionism frequently will lead to anxiety, depression, and difficult relationships. Okay, so with the gentler approach, you can still have goals and standards, right? But you can also have a more enjoyable life as well as more companionship and support. Perfectionism is a mental habit and is also the thief of joy. Have you guys heard that before? So some things that we can do, some strategies for change, do a reality check, right? So as you strive to accept imperfection, be clear about the true risks of the situation, right? What's the worst that can happen if you or a family member does something that's not up to your preferred standard? How likely is it really that the worst will occur? What's the more likely outcome? And is it completely unacceptable? Okay. Sometimes not so perfect is good enough, right? It's okay, especially if you have someone coming in to take over your caregiving duties while you take a break. It can be very easy to kind of worry and stress about if they're doing things up to your standards. Now, I understand there are some things that you have to have perfectly on point, right? Like feeding, medication, all that kind of stuff. I understand that. But there's also a lot of little things I think that we can fret and worry about that aren't necessarily worth our energy and our anxiety. And we can just let somebody do it the way they do it, and it's still okay. All right. So kind of releasing that grip a little bit, that control. Next, challenge your inner critic. We all have one. Some of ours are a little nicer to us than others, but it's still worth challenging that inner critic, okay? Especially if we're afraid of that failure, if we're afraid that perfect is our only option, challenge that thought, okay? So unlike a perfectionist, a healthy high achiever will recognize nuances and acknowledges that something may not be perfect, but still be good enough, okay? And I know that can be tough, especially if you have a very medically fragile or vulnerable person in your life. You don't want anything bad to happen to them. It's very easy to kind of fall into these very critical perfectionist spaces in our mind. So just take some time, really sit with yourself and think, is the worst case scenario likely? Is it possible? Probably. Is it likely? Or maybe not, right? And then just kind of see how you feel about just even imagining a scenario where you would accept something less than perfection. See how you feel. It might not be as bad as you think. Look for what's good, right? Again, we're creatures that are going to look for danger. We're going to look for negativity as a way to survive it, right? As a way to think our way out of it. And it's very difficult for us to kind of switch modes and see the positives and see the good things happening. So it is a practice, and we have to be intentional about that. So here's a little trick you can play. For every flaw you find in something or someone, stop and think and try to acknowledge at least 2 positives, right? So maybe, you didn't get, like we'll just use the example of that exercise before. So maybe you didn't get your mom to do all of her prescribed exercises, but she did do some, and she ate a good meal, and she got a good nap in, and those are some positives, right? So it's kind of like challenging that black and white or all or nothing thinking, right? Yes, maybe something not so cool happened during the day, but that doesn't mean the whole day is ruined now because one thing didn't go the way you wanted it to, okay? Celebrate small successes. So perfectionists will often procrastinate for fear of not doing something well enough. And so a way that we can break that logjam of doubt and inaction is to divide those tasks into smaller pieces and then recognize each accomplishment, right? Yes, maybe you didn't complete the task completely or all the way through, but you got some of it done, right? You started, you got a good chunk of it done, whatever the case may be. Celebrate those small successes, okay? That's the journey, right? That's embracing the journey and not being so focused on the outcome. And then finally, you are more than your achievements. I think this is important too. Sometimes we find a lot of self-worth in the work we do, but we got to think about who we are and not just what we do, right? So maybe write down some of your positive qualities. So maybe you are a caring, honest person. Maybe you have a good sense of humor, and just making time to not be productive and to just relax. Okay, you can just be. You don't have to be doing all the time. Okay, so shift your focus and enjoy being alive and good enough versus intensely goal focused and frustrated. Okay, because there's always going to be something else you could do. That's just life. But that doesn't mean you have to get it all done today at this very second, and it has to be perfect. And if it's not, the whole world's going to explode. Okay, it doesn't have to be a big catastrophe. All right. So here's some key takeaways. Get in, get done, and get out. Okay, so when we feel we constantly have to do something perfectly all the time, we can put things off and be afraid to move forward. But if you follow the rule of get in, get done, and get out by starting on the task in front of you and doing the best of your ability and then moving on without second guessing yourself, right? That's the key about how well you performed. Then you won't have time to judge yourself, right? I got it done. Now let's get out, right? Do it and let go of it. Take the actions and then let go of the results, right? Next, let go of expectations. So you can set such a high bar of expectation for yourself, thinking you have to be the absolute best at everything that you do. And that's just not possible, right? You have to cut corners sometimes. You're a human being and you can't be perfect. Nobody can be perfect, okay? And no one's really watching you as much as you think they are, right? And honestly, what they think about you is really none of your business. So just throw those expectations out of the window and just do the best that you can, okay? Especially when you're the one that stepped up to do the job. You're allowed to set the standards, okay? You don't have to worry about what other people are thinking, okay? And then finally, forgive yourself. Easier said than done. But silence that inner critic and show yourself some kindness, okay? It's okay to make mistakes. Again, we're human beings. If you can forgive other people for their mistakes, then you should be able to extend that same forgiveness to yourself, right? And so remind yourself that you're doing your best with good intentions that can ease self-criticism. So don't strive for perfection, focus on being the loving and caring person that you are, and you are doing your personal best. So you're capable, you do enough, and you have enough. So just by showing up, you're already winning half the battle, right? If you're struggling with the need for perfection, just do yourself a favor and try to let it go as best as you can. So you're already amazing just the way that you are, okay? So that was quick, nice and easy, hopefully. I'll go ahead and stop my share. And here's my sources if you're interested in them. And if you want these, I can always share them with you in an email. Just let me know, okay? So let me stop.